Hey guys, welcome to the Quiet Past historical channel. Tonight you are stepping into a world of marble temples and candlelit chambers, where the goddesses of ancient Greece prepared themselves for rest in ways both familiar and utterly distant from your own evening. You are about to drift through the quiet hours before sleep in the homes of women who lived thousands of years ago, women who understood something about the boundary between day and night that perhaps we have forgotten. The world is getting quieter around you now. In just a moment, we will walk together through the soft rituals and gentle preparations that surrounded the goddesses of Greek mythology and the women who devotedly honored them. This is not a story of grand battles or divine drama. Instead, it is a slow, intimate exploration of how these immortal beings were imagined to rest, how their followers prepared themselves for the vulnerable hours of darkness, and what it meant to care for one's body and spirit when the sun finally dipped below the horizon. The ancient Greeks understood the night as something sacred. It was not merely the absence of light, but a distinct realm with its own rules, its own goddesses, and its own particular magic. Tonight, as you settle deeper into your own rest, we will explore together what that realm looked like, what it felt like, and how the daily rituals surrounding sleep and bedtime were woven into the very fabric of Greek life. If you are the kind of person who finds comfort in slow, detailed historical storytelling, if you like to hear about the small moments that make up a life, the textures and sounds and routines that defined how people lived, then this is a space made for you. And if you find yourself coming back to these stories again and again, if they become part of your own wind-down routine, I would be deeply honored if you subscribe to this channel. These narratives are created with the intention that you will return to them, that they will become familiar friends in your evening, companions in the darkness. There is no pressure and no rush. Simply know that you are welcome here. Now, as the night deepens around us, let us begin. The twilight hour and the goddesses of darkness, the sun moves lower in the ancient Greek sky. It is that particular hour, not quite evening, not quite night, when the world seems to hold its breath. In homes across Greece, in the modest dwellings of Athens and the grander estates of Corinth, in the temple sanctuaries dedicated to the goddesses, and in the ordinary rooms where ordinary women prepared themselves for sleep, the same slow transition begins. This transition was understood not as a simple change in light, but as a passage from one realm to another. The ancient Greeks recognized that the hours between sunset and the deep of night belonged to particular deities, beings who govern the liminal space between consciousness and sleep, between the visible world and the mysterious darkness beyond. Hekate, the goddess of crossroads and thresholds, was believed to stir in this hour. She was not a gentle deity in the way we might imagine kindness today. Hekate was fierce, protective, and associated with the margins, with boundaries, doorways, and the spaces in between. She carried torches not for decoration, but for illumination of paths that might otherwise remain hidden. Her image was that of a being who stood guard during the vulnerable hours of darkness, particularly in the deep of night when most mortals slept. But before Hecate's true dominion began, there was Hesperus, the evening star, and with him came a particular quality of light that the Greeks understood as belonging to a specific moment in the day's arc. This was not the golden light of afternoon nor the darkness of true night. It was something softer, something that seemed to promise rest. In the home of a wealthy family in 5th century Athens, the women and servants would begin their preparations as the sun touched the horizon. A young daughter, perhaps 10 or 12 years old, would be brought to a quiet room where her mother or an older servant had prepared warm water. The water would have been heated slowly over the hearth fire during the afternoon hours, not boiling but pleasantly warm, almost body temperature. Sometimes herbs would be added to this water, chamomile for its gentle scent, sometimes dried rose petals from the garden that had been carefully preserved through the year. The girl would remove her outer garments, the Hammadian that she had worn throughout the day, and slip into the warm water. This was not a rushed activity. Time seemed to move differently in these rooms as the light faded. A servant would pour the water slowly over her shoulders and arms, moving with a kind of deliberate patience that communicated to the child that she was safe, that she was cared for, that the coming night was nothing to fear. While she bathed, the girl's mother might sit nearby, her own day's work beginning to settle. There would often be a soft conversation, barely above a whisper. The mother might tell stories of her own mother, tales that had been passed down through generations of women, stories that had been told in bedrooms just like this one for centuries. Some of these stories involved the goddesses. Some were simpler accounts of daily life, of how things were done, of the proper way to care for oneself and one's household. The air in the bathing room would fill with the warmth rising from the water, carrying with it the scent of herbs and the subtle smell of olive oil that had been used to anoint the skin. This was not mere cleanliness. The Greeks understood bathing before sleep as an entire ritual, a necessary transition that prepared not just the body but the mind and spirit for the hours of rest and vulnerability that lay ahead. Nyx, the goddess of night itself, was sometimes called upon during these preparations. Unlike Hekate, who was fierce and protective, Nyx was more ancient still, a primordial deity who had existed before the Olympian gods themselves took their current forms. She was the mother of many things: sleep, death, dreams, and even fate. Her image was typically rendered as a figure in flowing dark robes, moving through the sky in a chariot pulled by black horses, drawing night behind her like a veil being slowly drawn across the world. The Greeks did not fear Nyx in the way later European cultures would come to fear darkness itself. Instead, there was a kind of respect for her, a recognition that night was not merely the absence of day but was instead a distinct and necessary realm. Just as day had its goddess and its rhythms, so too did night. And just as the goddesses of day required proper respect and ritual attention, so did the goddesses of night. By the time the girl was dried with soft linen cloths that had been warmed near the fire earlier in the day, her mother would be brushing her hair. This was a slow process done with great care. The hair would be combed through section by section, and as it was combed, the process itself became a kind of meditation. The soft sound of the comb moving through hair, the gentle pull and release, the way the candlelight caught in the strands as they moved, all of this was part of the ritual. Sometimes while this was happening, the mother would hum, not a song exactly, though there might be melody to it. More often it was a low, rhythmic sound, almost like the distant sound of the ocean or of wind through trees. The Greeks understood that certain sounds were soothing, that the human voice, when used in particular ways, could quiet the mind in preparation for sleep. In other homes of women without servants, homes where the work of preparing for rest fell entirely on one woman or on older daughters helping younger ones, the rituals would be similar in intention but different in scale. A woman might draw water from the well in her courtyard and heat it in a large earthenware pot over the fire. She would wash herself quickly by the flickering light, using perhaps just a handful of water to wet her face, her arms, her feet. But even in this simpler version of the ritual, the intention remained the same: to mark the passage from day into night, to cleanse not just the physical body but to prepare the spirit for the vulnerability of sleep. Artemis, the goddess of the hunt and of the wild places, was also associated with the evening hours, though in a different way than Hekate or Nyx. Artemis was the protector of young women, the guardian of chastity and independence. While she was typically depicted as a being of movement and action, she was also understood to have dominion over the quiet hours when the hunt was done and the forest settled into stillness. In the preparations for sleep, Artemis represented a kind of quiet strength, a reminder that rest was not weakness but a necessary restoration of power. As the evening deepened in a typical Greek home, the pace of activity would slow further. If there had been a meal, and typically there would have been a light evening meal, less elaborate than the main meal of the day, which was taken at midday, it would have been finished. The food would have been simple: bread, perhaps some cheese, dried figs or olives, a small portion of fish or occasionally meat. Wine would have been drunk, but heavily diluted with water, as was the custom even in evening. The Greeks viewed undiluted wine as something close to a poison, something that needed to be tempered with water before consumption. The evening meal was not a time of great conversation or gathering, as the midday meal might have been. Instead, it was quiet, almost contemplative. The body was being prepared gradually for rest, with food that would be gentle on the digestive system during the hours of sleep. This was understood by the Greek physicians and philosophers of the time, even if they did not have the language we have today to describe metabolism and digestion. They understood instinctively that what one ate before sleep mattered, that heavy meals would disturb the night. And as the night deepens in these quiet homes across ancient Greece, the light in each room would be gradually reduced. Oil lamps would be dimmed or in some cases extinguished entirely. Candles made from beeswax or tallow would be allowed to burn lower, giving off a softer and softer light. The shadows in each room would grow larger, would move more slowly across the walls. The warmth of the day would continue to fade from the stone and the air. In the temples dedicated to the goddesses, to Artemis and to Hekate and to Nyx, the priestesses and devoted followers would be conducting their own evening rituals. In a temple to Artemis, there might be a simple ceremony as dusk arrived. The priestess would walk through the sanctuary, perhaps making an offering of herbs or flowers to the altar. She would speak words that had been spoken for generations, words of gratitude for the protection given throughout the day and a request for safe passage through the night. In shrines dedicated to Hekate, the rituals would be more elaborate and more mysterious. Hekate was honored with specific offerings, particularly at her festivals. But even on ordinary nights, there would be small acts of devotion, a light left burning on a crossroads, an offering of bread or honey left at a threshold, a prayer spoken in the darkness. These were not desperate acts. They were not prayers born of fear. Rather, they represented a kind of conversation between the mortal world and the divine. The Greeks understood that the night was a time when the boundary between the visible and invisible worlds grew thinner, when the possibility of encountering divine beings grew stronger. And so to prepare oneself for sleep was also, in some way, to prepare oneself for the possibility of encountering the sacred. The evening preparations, then, were never merely practical. Yes, they served the function of cleansing the body, of preparing the digestive system for rest, of adjusting the temperature and atmosphere of the sleeping space. But they also served a spiritual and psychological function. They marked the transition from the social, active hours of day to the private, vulnerable hours of night. They created a boundary, a kind of threshold that was crossed deliberately and with intention. As we move deeper into this night with you, as you settle more completely into your own rest, understand that you are participating in a ritual that is thousands of years old. The desire to prepare oneself for sleep, to create a boundary between day and night, to mark that transition with intention and care, these are not modern inventions. They are as old as human consciousness itself, and the ancient Greeks in their wisdom understood this deeply. Aphrodite and the preparation of the body. Now we turn to a goddess who might not immediately come to mind when we think of rest and sleep, and yet her domain was intricately connected to the evening preparations and to the intimate care of the body. Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, was also understood as the goddess of desire and sensuality. In the context of evening preparation, Aphrodite represented the care and attention given to the body as something valuable, something worthy of tenderness and slow attention. The evening bathing ritual we began to explore in the previous chapter would often include elements that were specifically associated with Aphrodite. The use of oils and perfumes, the careful attention to the appearance and feel of the skin, the gentle massage of the body as it was prepared for rest, all of these carried with them a certain energy associated with the goddess of sensuality and beauty. In a wealthy household in ancient Corinth, a woman in her late 20s might have her own servants to attend to her evening preparations. She would remove her day clothes, the simple linen or wool garments she had worn during the daylight hours, and step into a bath. But unlike the quick bathing that would happen in a poorer household, this woman's bathing might take an hour or more. The water itself would be prepared with great care. Servants would have drawn water from a well or cistern and heated it slowly throughout the afternoon. Sometimes this water would be infused with the petals of flowers that had been dried specifically for this purpose. Roses, certainly, but also lilies and other flowers that grew in Greek gardens. Sometimes herbs would be added, rosemary for its slightly warming properties, lavender for its gentle scent, mint for its subtle cooling effect. The woman would enter the water slowly, allowing her body to acclimate to the temperature. This was understood as important. A sudden shock to the system, even the pleasant shock of warm water, was believed to disturb the balance of the body's humors. Instead, the transition was meant to be gradual, almost imperceptible. As she settled into the water, her servant would begin to anoint her skin with oils. The oils used in these evening preparations would have been carefully chosen. Olive oil, of course, was the base, The Greeks used olive oil for almost everything from food to medicine to cosmetics, but to the olive oil would be added other ingredients. The scent of flowers might be infused into the oil through a process of slow steeping. A drop or two of something stronger, perhaps the oil extracted from rose petals or the scent of what we might call today a fragrant resin, would be added to create a more complex aroma. As the servant rubbed these oils into her skin, the woman would experience a gradual softening of her muscles, a relaxation that seemed to move from the surface of the skin inward. The massage itself was understood to be beneficial in ways that went beyond the merely physical. It was believed to help balance the circulation of blood, to encourage the flow of what the Greeks called pneuma, a kind of spiritual energy or life force throughout the body. The motions of the massage would be slow and repetitive. The servant would work along the woman's arms, starting at the shoulders and moving down toward the hands. The pressure would be firm enough to be felt but never harsh. The rhythm would be almost lulling, almost hypnotic in its regularity. Sometimes the servant might hum as she worked, adding another layer of sensory input that communicated safety and care. After the oil had been fully worked into the skin, the woman might be bathed again with warmer water to remove the excess oil. Or sometimes the oil would be left on the skin, as the Greeks believed that a light coating of oil helped to retain the body's natural moisture during the night. The choice would depend on personal preference, on the season, and on the specific properties the woman was seeking. Once she had been bathed and oiled, the woman would be dressed in her sleeping garments. These would be made of soft linen or fine wool, loose and comfortable with no tight fastenings or uncomfortable seams. The garments would be warm enough for the night, but not so warm as to cause overheating or discomfort. In the warmest months, a woman might sleep in just a simple linen tunic. In the colder months, she might wear a heavier garment, perhaps layered with a light wool overgown. Her hair, still damp from the bath, would be combed through and often braided loosely, in a way that would keep it out of her face during the night but would not be so tight as to cause tension on the scalp. Sometimes her hair would be adorned with a simple ribbon or a band of cloth, which served both the practical purpose of keeping the hair in place and the symbolic purpose of marking the transition from day to night. A woman in her day clothes would have her hair styled in a particular way. A woman in her sleeping clothes, with her hair braided and bound simply, was marking a shift in identity, a temporary release from the social roles and appearance requirements that occupied her during the day. Now we must pause here and acknowledge something important about the role of beauty and appearance in Greek culture. In the society that we are exploring, the appearance of women was indeed highly valued. A woman's beauty was understood as a reflection of her status, her worthiness, her power in certain spheres of life. The evening preparations, then, were not merely about personal comfort or about preparing the body for rest. They were also in some way about honoring oneself, about treating oneself as worthy of the kind of careful, devoted attention that was typically given only to sacred things. But here is where Aphrodite's domain becomes complex and interesting. While Aphrodite was certainly the goddess of beauty and of the kind of sexual appeal that could attract desire from others, she was also the goddess of sensuality, of the simple pleasure of sensation itself, independent of anyone else's gaze. To care for one's body in the evening, to anoint it with oils, and to allow oneself to feel the pleasure of soft fabrics against the skin, to take time to gently brush and arrange one's hair, all of this could be understood as an act of devotion to Aphrodite, whether it was being done for anyone else's benefit or not. In a sense, the evening preparations represented a kind of self-love in the most literal sense. They were an acknowledgement that one's own body was worthy of care, that one's own comfort mattered, that the simple pleasure of softness and warmth and pleasant scents was something that deserved to be cultivated. This is particularly interesting when we consider the lives of women in ancient Greece, which were in many ways highly circumscribed. A respectable woman's world was largely confined to the interior of her home. Her movements outside the home were limited and always required a male escort. Her participation in public religious ceremonies was limited. Her voice, literally speaking, was something that was meant to be heard primarily within the household, not in public spaces. And yet in the privacy of the evening preparations, in the bedroom and bathing chamber of the home, a woman could exercise a kind of agency and power. She could choose the oils she wanted to wear. She could decide how to arrange her hair. She could determine, at least to some degree, what her own body would experience. This was a sphere in which her desires and preferences mattered. In the homes of unmarried girls, the evening preparations might be simpler in execution, but no less important in meaning. A young girl of 8 or 9 being brought to her sleeping chamber by her mother or an older sister would be helped to remove her day clothes and put on a simple sleeping garment. Water, perhaps just cool water on this occasion, not a full bath, might be used to wash her face and hands and feet. Her hair would be gently combed through, and as this was happening, the older woman might speak to her about her body, about how to care for it, about the changes that would come as she grew older. These conversations, taking place in the quiet and privacy of the evening, were a crucial part of how Greek girls learned about femininity, about their own bodies, and about what it meant to be a woman in their society. In some cases, particularly in the homes of the wealthier families, there would be another element to the evening preparations: the application of perfume. The Greeks were not great makers of perfumes in the way that later European cultures would be, but they did use scented oils and occasionally actual perfumes, which they imported from Egypt and other distant lands. A woman might have 1 or 2 precious bottles of perfume, substances that were expensive and rare, used only for special occasions or sometimes as a kind of simple luxury in the evening hours. A drop or 2 behind the ears, a tiny amount on the wrists, perhaps a trace of it applied to the fold between the neck and shoulder. These small applications of scent would linger as she lay in bed, would become part of the experience of lying in darkness, would add one more layer of sensory comfort to the night. The scent of perfume, the Greeks understood, had particular properties. It was believed to have an effect on the mind and the spirit, to calm anxiety, to promote good dreams. The choice of scent mattered. Rose was believed to be particularly calming. Lavender, if it was used, would also contribute to sleep. Heavier, more complex scents, musk for instance, or certain types of incense, might be reserved for other occasions when wakefulness and alertness were desired. And as the evening deepens further, as the woman lies in her bed, having completed all of these preparations, the effects of the ritual begin to accumulate. Her skin is soft and smooth from the oil. Her hair is arranged in a way that is comfortable. Her body is warm and clean. The scent of the oils or perfume lingers faintly in the air around her, in the fabric of her sleeping garment, becoming more noticeable as she moves her head or shifts her position. Her mind, having been engaged in the slow, repetitive motions of the evening rituals, has begun to quiet. The activities of the day, any arguments or anxieties or pieces of business left unfinished, have begun to seem distant, less urgent. The boundary between day and night marked by these rituals has been crossed. She is now in a different realm, a different state of being. In the darkness of her chamber, the last small oil lamp might still be burning, casting a single point of light and creating a small circle of visibility around it. The rest of the room would be in shadow. As she closes her eyes, as she settles deeper into the soft bedding, she would carry with her the sensory impressions of the evening. The warmth of the water, the feel of the oils being rubbed into her skin, the faint scent that surrounds her, the softness of the fabric beneath her. And as we continue to sit with you in this darkness, as we continue to move through the evening hours of this ancient world, understand that you too are experiencing something of what these women experienced. As you listen to these words, as you allow your mind to follow these descriptions, your own breathing may have slowed. Your own muscles may be beginning to relax. The sensory images we are describing may be creating a kind of calm in your own mind, even as you experience them only through words, through the imagination. This is part of the magic of these ancient rituals. They were designed or evolved over time to be deeply effective at calming the mind and body, at creating the conditions for rest. And those same principles still work today. Demeter and the evening meal, while the bathing and anointing of the body was happening in one part of the home, another kind of preparation was taking place in the kitchen and dining areas. The evening meal, known as deipna in Greek, was being prepared and consumed. And this meal, like everything else in the Greek evening, was connected to the divine, particularly to Demeter, the goddess of grain, agriculture, and nourishment. Demeter's domain was broad. She was understood as the goddess who ensured that crops grew, that the earth produced food, that hunger was satisfied. She was associated with the growth of grain, with bread making, with all the processes that transformed raw ingredients into nourishing food. And in the evening ritual of eating, she was honored, whether explicitly or implicitly. The kitchen of a Greek home in the evening was a particular kind of space. If we were to step into such a kitchen, the kitchen of a moderately wealthy household in Athens, let us say in the 4th century before the Common Era, we would find ourselves in a room that was quite different from what we might expect. The kitchen would be relatively simple. There would be a hearth, likely the main source of heat and light in the home. Unlike later European kitchens, which would be separate from the main living spaces, the Greek kitchen was often integrated into the household, positioned in a location where the heat from the fire could warm other rooms as well. On or near the hearth there would be various cooking vessels, large earthenware pots, metal cooking tripods, grills for roasting food over the fire. There would be a work table or work surface, likely made of stone, where food would be prepared. Various jars and containers would hold the ingredients used in cooking, olive oil certainly and salt, herbs dried from the previous harvest, perhaps some garum or fish sauce, grains stored for use, preserved fruits or vegetables. In the evening the meal would be simpler than the main meal of the day. The main meal, the Demeter, was traditionally eaten in the afternoon after the day's work was done. It would be the largest meal, would consist of bread and various accompaniments, might include meat or fish, would be eaten in a more social context, possibly with conversation and with the inclusion of family members or guests. The evening meal, by contrast, would be lighter. It would be eaten closer to bedtime, and it would be designed not to be too heavy, not to burden the digestive system during the hours of sleep. This was understood by the Greeks, even without modern knowledge of digestion, as a matter of practical health. A person who ate a heavy meal before sleep would sleep poorly, would have disturbing dreams, might wake in the night feeling uncomfortable. In the kitchen of our household, a servant, often a younger woman or a girl, or sometimes a hired worker, would be preparing this evening meal. The preparation would begin in the late afternoon, but the actual cooking would happen as the evening grew closer, so that the meal would be warm and ready to eat as darkness fell. The meal might consist of bread, certainly. Fresh bread would have been baked earlier in the day in a communal oven if the household did not have its own. The bread might be warm still, or it might be at room temperature by the evening. It would likely be accompanied by something to dip it in or to eat with it. A simple oil and vinegar sauce might be prepared, or the bread might be eaten with cheese, goat cheese or sheep cheese, common in Greece. There might be olives preserved in salt or in oil. These would be stored in jars and would last throughout the year. They would be eaten a small handful at a time as a part of the meal. They provided salt and flavor and a kind of richness to what might otherwise be a very plain meal. There might be dried or preserved fish. The Greeks, living as so many of them did near the sea or near river valleys, had long practiced the art of preserving fish by drying it or salting it heavily. A small portion of dried fish, softened perhaps in water, would provide protein and would make the meal feel more substantial. In the warmest months there might be fresh fruits, grapes certainly, or figs if they were in season. These would be served fresh or might be eaten with a small amount of honey being the primary sweetener available in the Greek world. And there would be wine. Always wine, though in the evening it would be heavily diluted with water. The ratio of wine to water varied, but generally in the evening the proportion might be as much as 3 or 4 parts water to 1 part wine. This was not a beverage to intoxicate, but rather a flavored water, something to cleanse the palate and aid in digestion. The preparation of this meal would not be rushed. Even though it was simpler than the midday meal, it would receive attention and intention. If the person preparing the meal had any love for the work, any sense that preparing food was a kind of craft or even a kind of art, this would be evident in small touches, in the way the bread was arranged, in the careful selection of which olives to include, in the brewing of the wine and water mixture to the proper temperature. And if we were to ask the Greek women of the time about the meaning of this preparation, about why it mattered, they would likely point us toward Demeter. Demeter was not only the goddess of the grain, the goddess of the harvest, the goddess of agriculture. She was also understood as the goddess of nourishment, of care, of the continuation of life. To prepare a meal, even a simple meal, even an evening meal, was to honor Demeter, to participate in the fundamental human act of sustaining life. There is a story told about Demeter that illuminates this connection. Demeter had a daughter, Persephone, who was abducted by Hades and taken to the underworld. Demeter, in her grief, ceased to cause anything to grow. The earth became barren, humanity faced starvation. Eventually, a compromise was reached. Persephone would spend part of the year in the underworld and part of the year in the upper world with her mother. and when Persephone returned, Demeter's joy caused all things to grow again. The story is one of loss and restoration, of the fundamental human fear of famine and the fundamental human joy of abundance. And it was a story that was invoked, at least implicitly, every time a meal was prepared. The act of preparing food, of transforming raw ingredients into something nourishing and sustaining, was a kind of magic in the Greek understanding. It was a participation in Demeter's power, a cooperation with the forces that allowed life to continue. In the home, the evening meal would typically be eaten by the family in a common space. Depending on the home's layout and the family's resources, this might be in the dining room proper, or it might be in a shared space near the kitchen. The family would recline on couches or would sit on stools or benches. In some cases, different family members would eat at different times, with the men of the household eating together first, then the women and children. The meal itself would be eaten slowly. There would be no sense of rush. Even in a household where the resources were limited and the meal was very simple, there would be a kind of ceremony to the eating. The food would be shared. There might be a moment of acknowledgement of the food, a kind of prayer or expression of gratitude, though the historical record is not entirely clear about how common such explicit prayers were in everyday settings. As the family ate, the evening would continue to deepen around them. The light from the windows would become fainter. The light from the hearth and from oil lamps would become relatively brighter. The temperature in the home would continue to cool slightly as the heat of the day dissipated from the stone and earth around them. The meal would be finished, the dishes would be cleared. In a wealthy household, servants would handle the cleanup. In a poorer household, the women and older daughters would wash the dishes in water, perhaps heated slightly from the hearth fire. The kitchen would gradually settle into quietness. And now, with the meal finished, with the body having taken in nourishment, the final preparations for sleep could begin in earnest. The evening meal served a particular purpose in the sequence of evening preparations. It was not meant to be forgotten quickly. Rather, it was meant to sit gently in the stomach, to be digested slowly throughout the night, to provide a kind of sustained nourishment that would support the body through the hours of sleep and into the morning. The Greeks understood that the night was a kind of fast, a period without food. Breakfast, when it came in the morning, would break that fast. And so the evening meal needed to be chosen and prepared with this in mind. It needed to be nourishing enough to sustain, but light enough to digest without disturbing sleep. In a sense, the evening meal was a kind of promise, a promise that the body would be cared for through the night, that nourishment would be provided, that one would not wake in the morning famished or with an upset stomach. It was Demeter's final gift of the day, the goddess's assurance that abundance would continue, that life would be sustained, that tomorrow would come. And as the night deepens further, as the house grows quieter and the meal settles into the body, the sense of security deepens. The rituals have been performed. The preparations have been made. The body has been bathed and oiled and fed. The home is warm and safe. The boundaries between day and night have been marked and crossed. We are now moving into the deeper hours of evening, the hours when sleep begins to seem like a real and approaching possibility rather than something distant and abstract. And the mind, having been engaged in the slow rituals of preparation, has begun to settle, to quiet, to turn inward. Hestia and the hearth fire, there is one goddess we have not yet spoken of, and yet she may be the most essential to understanding the evening rituals of ancient Greece. Hestia, the goddess of the hearth and of the home, was perhaps the most important and most beloved of all the goddesses in everyday Greek life, even if she is less famous to us today than her more dramatic siblings. Hestia's importance cannot be overstated. In every Greek home, in every temple, at the center of every public gathering place, there was a hearth. This was not merely a source of heat and light, though it was certainly that. The hearth was the spiritual center of the home. It was sacred. It was associated with Hestia, and to care for the hearth was to honor the goddess. The evening hearth fire was different from the daytime hearth fire. During the day, the fire might burn more brightly. The flames might rise higher as people moved about the home, adding wood and tending to cooking. But as evening approached, as the day's work was finished and the evening meal was concluded, the fire would be tended in a different way. Someone in the household, often the mistress of the house, or sometimes an older daughter, or in poorer households perhaps the only woman present, would approach the hearth as evening fell. They would carefully arrange the remaining wood or coals to create a fire that would burn slowly throughout the night. The goal was to maintain a steady, gentle heat and light without the fire burning too hot or consuming too quickly. This was a practical matter. A fire that burned too hot would overheat the home and might be dangerous. But it was also a spiritual matter. The tending of the evening hearth fire was a ritual, an act of devotion to Hestia. As the fire was arranged, words might be spoken, invocations, prayers, expressions of gratitude for the home and for the goddess's protection. The person tending the fire would move slowly with intention. They would use a long stick or poker to arrange the coals and wood. The heat from the fire would warm their face and hands. The light from the fire would create moving shadows across the room. The smoke from the fire would rise and drift toward the opening in the roof that allowed it to escape in homes that had such openings. In many modest Greek homes, the smoke from the hearth fire would simply fill the space, gradually working its way out through various openings and gaps in the structure. To sit by the hearth fire in the evening was to sit in a sacred space. The fire itself was understood to be a connection between the earthly realm and the divine. Hestia was always present at the hearth. She was the closest of all the gods and goddesses to the everyday lives of mortals, and the hearth was her primary home. The mythology tells us that Hestia was the eldest of the Olympian goddesses, the sister of Zeus and Poseidon and Demeter and Hera. But unlike her siblings, who were constantly involved in dramatic adventures and conflicts, Hestia remained steadfast at the hearth. She was quiet, stable, utterly reliable. She did not engage in the love affairs and conflicts that marked the lives of the other gods. She simply was always present, always protecting the home. This steady, quiet presence was deeply valued in Greek culture. In a world that could be chaotic and unpredictable, in a world where violence and uncertainty were constant threats, the reliability of Hestia was something to be deeply grateful for. To have a home, to have a safe place, to have a hearth that was kept safe and warm through the care of the goddess, these were profound blessings. In the evening, as the household gathered around the hearth fire, and many households would spend the evening hours sitting near the hearth, as it was the primary source of light and warmth in the home, there would be a particular quality to the time and space. The fire would glow and flicker, creating a world of warm light immediately around it and darkness beyond. The people gathered would be brought into an intimate space together. If there were children in the household, they would sit near the hearth in the evening. The warmth of the fire would be comforting. The flickering light would create shadows that could be frightening or fascinating depending on the mood of the child and the stories being told. An older woman might tell stories by the firelight, stories of the gods, stories of heroes, stories of the family's own history and lineage. The sound of the fire, the soft crackling and popping of burning wood, the occasional sudden shift as a piece of wood burned through and collapsed into the coals would be the primary sound in the home. Other sounds would be occasional, the voice of someone speaking, the movement of someone adjusting their position, the rustle of fabric. In the warmth of the fire's glow, in the gentle light and the comfortable heat, the home became a kind of womb, a safe and warm place protected from the darkness and cold outside. This was Hestia's domain, the creation and maintenance of this safe, warm, protected space. As the evening progressed and the time for sleep drew near, the fire would be tended one more time. If it was the duty of a particular person to maintain the fire throughout the night, which it would be in many households, that person might add specific pieces of wood chosen to burn slowly to provide steady warmth and light through the hours of darkness. The fire would never be completely extinguished in a Greek home. To let the fire go out completely was considered very bad luck and was something that was usually avoided. If the fire did accidentally go out, it might be relit from a neighbor's fire rather than being created anew, as this was believed to preserve the continuity of the goddess's presence and protection. This perpetual fire, never fully extinguished, was a kind of physical manifestation of Hestia's constant presence in the home. Just as the goddess was always there, always watching, always protecting, so too the fire continued to burn, a visible reminder of divine presence and care. In some cases, families might visit a public hearth, perhaps at a temple or at a civic gathering place, to rekindle their home fire with a flame taken from this common source. This created a kind of connection between the home and the public sphere, between the goddess as she was honored in private domestic spaces and the goddess as she was honored in public and communal settings. The evening hours then were deeply connected to Hestia's presence and power. As darkness fell outside the home, the hearth fire became more significant, more central to the life of the household. The warmth of the fire, the light it provided, the sense of safety and enclosure that it created, all of this was Hestia's gift. And as the members of the household gradually made their way to their sleeping spaces, as they left the communal warmth of the hearth fire to retire to their individual chambers, they carried with them a sense of security that had been established by the fire and by the presence of the goddess. They knew that the fire would continue to burn through the night. They knew that Hestia was watching, was protecting, would ensure that the home remained safe while they slept. For children especially, this knowledge was crucial. A child being put to bed could be comforted by the knowledge that the hearth fire was still burning elsewhere in the home, that an adult was still present and awake, that the home was still being cared for and protected. The child could sleep knowing that they were part of a protected space, that their home was held within Hestia's care. The smoke from the fire, rising through the home and escaping through openings in the roof, would carry prayers and thanks up to the heavens, to the gods themselves. The evening hearth tending, then, was a kind of direct communication with the divine, a way of maintaining the connection between the mortal household and the immortal gods. And as we sit with you in the darkness of your own evening, we might think about the fires that warmed the ancient Greek homes, about the steadiness and constancy of Hestia's presence, about the security that comes from knowing one is held within a protected space, cared for by divine forces that never sleep, never abandon their post, never cease in their devotion to the safety and well-being of the home. Hypnos and the realm of sleep, and now, as the night deepens further, as the home grows quieter and darker, we must speak of Hypnos, the god of sleep himself. Unlike the goddesses we have discussed until now, Hypnos was male, and he occupied a unique place in the Greek understanding of the world. Hypnos was not a major Olympian god. He was not one of the 12 who dwelt on Mount Olympus. Instead, he was a kind of minor deity, a being whose realm was less dramatic than that of the great gods, but no less important to the functioning of the world. Hypnos was the son of Nyx, the goddess of night, and of Erebus, the embodiment of darkness. He had a twin brother called Thanatos, who was the god of death. And it is here that we encounter something very important about the Greek understanding of sleep. Sleep and death were understood as close cousins, as related states that were somehow connected to each other. This was not the morbid association that we might imagine. Rather, it was an understanding that sleep and death were both transitions, both movements from one state of being into another, both times when the ordinary rules and consciousness of daily life were suspended or transformed. When you slept, you left behind your conscious self, your social identity, your awareness of the world. You entered a different realm, and while you would return from that realm with the coming of morning, in the moment of sleep you were genuinely absent from the world you usually inhabited. The Greeks understood this and did not fear it exactly, but rather respected it. Sleep was understood to be necessary, to be essential, to be something that was needed for health and well-being. But it was also understood as a kind of risk, a kind of vulnerability. And so to prepare oneself for sleep was to prepare oneself to encounter Hypnos, to willingly enter his realm. The evening rituals we have been discussing, the bathing, the anointing with oils, the careful preparation of the sleeping space, the dimming of lights, the transition from social activity to private repose, all of these were understood as ways of preparing for the encounter with Hypnos. They were ways of saying yes to sleep, of opening oneself to the god's gentle dominion. In the mythology, Hypnos is sometimes depicted as a gentle figure, a being who brings relief and rest. But he is also sometimes depicted as elusive, hard to grasp. People might cry out to Hypnos, might desperately desire his touch, and yet he might evade them. The ancient Greeks understood insomnia, understood the frustration of lying awake and unable to sleep, understood that Hypnos's blessing could not always be commanded or demanded. Instead, one had to prepare oneself for sleep, had to make oneself receptive to the god's arrival, and then had to trust that Hypnos would come. This is where the evening rituals truly earned their importance. By engaging in the ritual preparations, by bathing, by oiling the body, by eating a light meal, by dimming the lights, by removing oneself from social activity, one was essentially inviting Hypnos into one's life, was creating the conditions under which he could arrive. The sleeping chambers themselves were prepared with this in mind. The bed itself was a place of importance. In a wealthy household, the bed might be an actual piece of furniture, a wooden frame with a mattress of woven cloth filled with wool or other soft materials. In a poorer household, the bed might be simpler, perhaps just a pallet on the floor, but it would still be prepared with care, with clean cloth, with an attempt to make it as comfortable as possible. The bedding was often made of linen, which was cooler and smoother than wool. It was washed regularly as the available water supply and the labor required would allow. It would be dried in the sun, and the sun's heat and light were believed to have a purifying effect on the fabric. In the hours before sleep, the bed itself might be warmed. If the weather was cold, a servant might place heated stones wrapped in cloth in the bed an hour or so before the person was ready to sleep. This would warm the bedding and create a more inviting place to lie down. As the night progressed, the warmth from the stones would fade, and the body's own warmth would take over, maintaining the comfortable temperature. Some wealthy households might have a small brazier of coals placed in the sleeping chamber, raised on legs or placed in a sheltered location so that it posed no fire risk but would still provide gentle warmth and light through the night. The smoke from the brazier would rise and drift away. The glow from the coals would provide just enough light to see shapes and shadows, to know that one was not in absolute darkness. Most bedrooms, however, would be quite dark. A small oil lamp left burning with a wick turned very low might provide the only light, a tiny point of illumination that would remind the sleeper that they were not completely isolated, that light and safety still existed even though they were sleeping. And as the person lay in their bed, having completed all the preparations, having washed and oiled and eaten and changed into sleeping clothes, they would begin the final transition into sleep. This transition was not instantaneous. Sleep came gradually, moving through stages, approaching slowly rather than arriving all at once. In the early stages of this transition, the mind would still be somewhat active. Thoughts might continue to flow, memories might surface, the events of the day might play through consciousness. But gradually the quality of thought would change. The thoughts would become more like dreams, less connected to waking logic, more fluid and strange. The boundaries between self and world might begin to dissolve. The body too would relax further. The muscles would release their tension completely. The breathing would become slower and more regular. The heartbeat would slow. The body temperature might drop slightly as the conscious mind released its hold on bodily functions and allowed them to settle into their deeper rhythms. And here, in this liminal space between waking and sleeping, Hypnos would make his appearance. Not as a visible being perhaps, but as a presence, a power that drew the consciousness further and further from the waking world into the realm of sleep and dreams. The Greeks understood that Hypnos was associated with dreams, and that dreams were a kind of communication, a kind of contact with the divine or with one's own deeper consciousness. The dreams that came during sleep were not considered meaningless or insignificant. They were believed to have meaning, to carry messages, to be worth remembering and reflecting upon after waking. In some cases, people would perform rituals designed to encourage specific kinds of dreams. They might sleep in a temple, seeking dreams that would provide guidance or healing. They might ask the gods for dreams that would help them with difficult decisions or problems. But even in regular sleep, at home in their own beds, people expected that their dreams might have significance, that Hypnos might reveal something during the night that would be useful to know. And so the approach to sleep was not one of simple mindlessness, not a desire to simply be unconscious for a period of time. Rather, it was an active, conscious engagement with the realm of sleep and dreams, a willingness to engage with something that was understood as real and significant, even if it operated according to different rules than the waking world. As we move with you deeper into this night, as your own sleep grows closer and more compelling, we might reflect on the presence of Hypnos in your own evening. The preparations you might make for sleep, the things you do to make yourself more comfortable, to create conditions that invite rest. These are participations in a ritual that is thousands of years old. The desire to sleep, the need for sleep, the way that sleep comes gradually and gently rather than abruptly. These are all part of Hypnos' realm, part of his ancient and ongoing gift to humanity. And as you feel yourself beginning to drift, As the boundary between waking and sleeping becomes less distinct, you might feel a kind of gratitude for the god's presence, for his ancient power, for the way that he continues, even now in the darkness of your own evening, to gather mortals into his realm of rest and dreams. Morpheus and the dreams of the night deep within the realm governed by Hypnos, there exists another being, another god who is so closely associated with sleep that sometimes the two are confused or conflated. This is Morpheus, whose name means the shaper or the molder, for Morpheus is the god of dreams, the being who shapes the dreams that come during sleep. If Hypnos is the state of sleep itself, the condition of being asleep, then Morpheus is the content of sleep, the narratives and images and experiences that unfold while the body rests. He is the dream maker, the figure who brings forth the strange and sometimes profound experiences that occur when the conscious mind releases its grip on waking reality. In the ancient Greek imagination, Morpheus was typically depicted as a young man, sometimes with wings, sometimes with poppies in his hair or hand. The poppy was sacred to both Hypnos and Morpheus because certain varieties of poppy could be used to create compounds that brought sleep or enhanced dreams. But the poppy was not the only association. Morpheus was also connected to the moon, to the night, to shadows, to the liminal spaces where reality became less solid and dreams became more real. When a person lay in bed in ancient Greece, having passed through all the evening rituals and preparations and had begun to drift into sleep, they were moving into Morpheus's domain. As the conscious mind loosened its hold, as the body relaxed completely, Morpheus would begin his work. He would create the dreams that would fill the night, would weave together the fragments of memory and emotion and experience into narratives that would unfold in the darkness. The Greeks took their dreams seriously. While we might today tend to dismiss dreams as random firing of neurons during sleep, as meaningless byproducts of rest, the ancient Greeks understood dreams as something real and significant. They were believed to be messages, to carry meaning, to be worth remembering and analyzing. There was a practice, especially in the context of religious devotion, called incubation, where a person would deliberately sleep in a sacred space, usually a temple dedicated to a healing god like Asclepius, the god of medicine, in hopes of receiving a healing dream, a dream that would provide guidance about an illness or that might even bring healing itself. But even in the context of ordinary sleep in the home, dreams were believed to have significance. An unusual dream might be remembered and discussed with family members in the morning. A recurring dream might be seen as a message from the gods or from one's own deeper consciousness. A nightmare might be taken as a warning or as an indication that something was wrong, something that needed to be addressed. The goddess Artemis, whom we spoke of earlier in connection with the evening preparations, was also associated with dreams in some contexts. Dreams that came to young women particularly were sometimes understood to be communications from Artemis, the great protector and guide of young women. A maiden might receive guidance in a dream about her future, about decisions she needed to make, about dangers she should avoid. Similarly, Aphrodite might send dreams to people, particularly dreams involving love or desire or connection. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, might send dreams that were particularly clear and logical, dreams that provided solutions to problems or that revealed important information. And beneath all of these specific dream senders stood Morpheus, the fundamental dream maker, the one who shaped all dreams, who created the stage and the scenarios within which these other divine communications might occur. In a sleeping chamber in ancient Greece, a person drifting deeper into sleep would, if they remained even partially aware of their own drowsiness, experience the strange transition where dreams begin. The room might seem to shift slightly. Thoughts might suddenly become bizarre or impossible. Images might appear seemingly from nowhere. The boundaries between self and other, between inside and outside, might dissolve. This is Morpheus's realm, the territory where his power is most complete. And in this realm, things operate according to different rules than they do in waking life. An object might be simultaneously two different objects. A person might be both themselves and someone else. Time might move strangely. A dream that seems to last for hours might occur in just minutes of clock time, while a dream that seems to last for moments might actually unfold over a longer period. The ancient Greeks understood something about this strangeness of dreams, about their distance from waking logic. They did not try to make dreams conform to waking logic. Instead, they tried to understand the logic of dreams, to listen to what dreams were trying to tell them, even if the message came in a symbolic or distorted form. A person might dream of a deceased family member, and in the dream, this dead person might deliver a message or provide comfort. The death of the family member was real, but the communication that occurred in the dream was also understood to be real in its own way, to be a genuine encounter that took place in Morpheus's realm. A person might dream of being pursued by a monster or a dangerous figure. In the dream, the fear would feel absolutely real. The danger would seem real. But upon waking, the dreamer would know that they were safe, that the danger had existed only in Morpheus's realm, in the dreams of the night. And yet the dream might still carry meaning. It might reflect waking anxieties, might be a warning about something real that needed to be addressed, might be a communication about psychological or emotional states that were not being fully acknowledged in waking life. The practice of dream interpretation, called oneiromancy, was developed to a high art in ancient Greece. There were experts who specialized in interpreting dreams, who had written texts about which dreams were auspicious and which were inauspicious, who could help people understand what their dreams meant. But this interpretation required a kind of openness, a willingness to engage with the dream on its own terms, to allow the dream's logic rather than to impose waking logic onto the dream. It required understanding that Morpheus was not trying to communicate in clear, literal language, but rather was speaking in the language of symbols and images and emotional truths. In the chamber where a person slept, as the night deepened and sleep became deeper, dreams would come and go. In the early hours of sleep, the dreams might be lighter, might be closer to waking thoughts. But as the night continued, as deeper sleep took hold, the dreams would become more vivid, more strange, more clearly the work of Morpheus. The sleeper might not be aware of these dreams while they were happening. Many dreams are forgotten immediately upon waking, as if Morpheus has drawn a veil over them. But some dreams remain in memory, vivid and strange, full of images and emotions that linger even as the dream details fade. And so the night in the ancient Greek understanding was not a period of simple unconsciousness, not a blank space between one day and the next. Rather, it was a filled space populated with dreams, with the work of Morpheus, with the experiences that unfolded in the realm where waking logic did not apply. To sleep deeply, to dream vividly, to remember the dreams and reflect on them in the morning, these were understood as normal and healthy parts of existence. To be denied sleep, to suffer insomnia, and thus to be denied the dreams that would come, was understood as a kind of punishment, a kind of suffering. And as we sit with you in the darkness of this night, as your own consciousness is moving gradually into that realm where Morpheus holds sway, you too are beginning to experience what the ancient Greeks experienced. The strangeness of drowsiness, the way that thought becomes less linear and more fluid, the approach of dreams, these are all familiar to them and to you, separated by thousands of years but united in the shared experience of sleep and dreams. The bedroom and the space of rest. Now we must take a moment to describe in detail the physical space where all of these evening rituals culminated, where Hypnos and Morpheus held sway. We must speak of the bedroom itself, the chamber where sleep took place, the room that was understood as a sacred space in its own way, as a sanctuary dedicated to the needs of rest and vulnerable repose. The bedrooms of ancient Greece varied tremendously depending on the wealth and status of the household. In a very poor household, there might be only 1 or 2 rooms in the entire dwelling, and sleeping might happen in a corner of the main living space, separated by a cloth or a screen from where the family gathered during waking hours. In a wealthy household, there might be multiple bedrooms, with the master bedroom being a distinct and comfortable space and servants' sleeping quarters being more minimal. But regardless of these material differences, all bedrooms shared certain characteristics. They were first and foremost private spaces. They were spaces separated from the main living areas of the home, spaces where one could withdraw, could remove oneself from the sight and presence of others. This was important because the bedroom was understood as a vulnerable space, When one slept, one was defenseless. One's consciousness was absent. And so the bedroom needed to be a place where one could let down one's guard, where one could trust that one would not be disturbed, that one's vulnerability would be respected. In a typical bedroom in a Greek home, the dominant feature would be the bed. The bed itself was not merely a piece of furniture for sleeping. It was also, in many cases, a place where the intimate life of marriage took place, where children might be born, where the body was most vulnerable and most intimate. The bed was often the most valuable piece of furniture in a household, something that would be carefully made and maintained, something that would be inherited through generations. The bed might be made of wood, olive wood if the household could afford it, as olive wood was highly valued for its durability and its resistance to decay. The frame would be sturdy, designed to last. The mattress would be filled with wool or straw or other soft materials. In some cases, the mattress might be filled with feathers if the household was wealthy enough to afford such luxury. The bedding itself would be made of linen in warm months, wool in cold months, or a combination of materials. The cloth would be woven carefully, would be as smooth as the available technology could make it. It would be washed regularly and hung to dry in the sun, and this exposure to the sun's heat and light was believed to have a purifying effect, to drive out any malignant spirits or unhealthy miasmas that might cling to the fabric. The blankets or heavy cloths that covered the bed would be chosen based on the season. In summer, a person might sleep with just a light linen sheet. In winter, heavy woolen blankets would be layered over the bed, and additional blankets might be piled on top of a sleeper, creating a nest of warmth and security. The pillows, and yes, pillows existed in ancient Greece, might be filled with feathers or with other soft materials. In some cases, a person might use a simple rounded stone wrapped in cloth as a kind of cushion or support. The quality of the pillow might vary tremendously, from the softest feather pillow in a wealthy home to the simplest cloth-wrapped stone in a poor home, but the principle was the same. The head should be supported, should rest on something that would allow comfort and ease. Around the bed there would be some open space, enough for a person to move from standing to lying down, enough to prevent a feeling of being trapped or enclosed, but not so much open space that the bedroom felt empty or cold. The room would contain other pieces of furniture, perhaps a small table where water and a cup might be kept, for drinking during the night if thirst arose. Perhaps a stool or a chair where clothing could be hung or folded. There might be a small altar or a shrine to a particular goddess or god that the person felt affinity with. A candle might be left burning here, or a small offering might be left. Some people kept images or small statues of the goddesses in their sleeping chambers. A statuette of Artemis perhaps, or of Hestia, or of Hekate. These objects served as reminders of the protection and care of the divine, as touchstones that connected the sleeper to the larger world of spiritual and divine forces. The windows, if the bedroom had windows, would typically be small. Large windows would have been impractical in an ancient Greek home, as they would have allowed too much heat loss in winter and made the room difficult to heat or cool. Windows might be covered at night with shutters or with cloth to keep out the night air and to prevent anyone from looking in. The door to the bedroom, similarly, would be simple and sturdy. It might be locked, particularly in the case of married women or of valuable property or of women living in households where security was a concern. The ability to lock one's door was one of the few ways that privacy could be ensured. The floor of the bedroom might be packed earth if the household was poor, or it might be stone if the household was wealthier. In some cases, the floor might be tiled. Over the floor, in places where the household could afford it, there might be woven mats or even wool carpets. These served the practical purpose of insulating the floor against cold, but they also created a more comfortable and aesthetically pleasing space. The walls of the bedroom would be made of stone or brick, covered perhaps with plaster or with whitewash. If the household was wealthy, the walls might be painted with simple designs or images. These paintings might depict natural scenes, flowers, animals, elements of nature, or might depict more formal decorative patterns. The images and patterns would be created with natural pigments, colors that had been used for centuries to decorate Greek homes. The light in the bedroom at night would come from a small oil lamp, usually hung from the wall or placed on a small shelf. The lamp would be filled with oil, usually olive oil, though in poor households it might be cheaper vegetable oils, and the wick would be adjusted so that it burned with a soft, steady light. This light would be just sufficient to see by if one woke in the night, but dim enough that it would not interfere with sleep. Some people might prefer to sleep in complete darkness, and if that was the case, the lamp might be moved outside the room or might be covered with a cloth that would block its light from reaching the sleeping person. The choice of whether to sleep in darkness or with a small light would depend on personal preference, on the availability of fuel for the lamp, and on the cultural or religious practices of the household. The temperature of the bedroom would be cool in most seasons. The stone walls and floor would retain the coolness of the earth. This coolness, which might seem uncomfortable to modern sensibilities, was understood in the ancient world as healthy. It was believed to promote sleep, to cool the body and mind, to help balance the humors. A completely warm room might be seen as conducive to overheating, to fever, to disturbed sleep. In winter, when the coldness might be extreme, a brazier might be placed in the room to provide heat, or hot stones wrapped in cloth might be placed in the bed to warm it. But in the spring and fall and summer, the coolness of the room would simply be accepted as part of the environment. The sounds of the bedroom would be minimal. If the bedroom was in a home that was somewhat isolated or on the upper level of a home, the sounds from outside would be muted. The sounds of the household going about its evening activities might filter in faintly, but by the time a person was actually lying down to sleep, most of these sounds would have faded. There might be the sound of wind outside moving past the walls and around the shutters. There might be the sound of rain if it was a rainy night, a steady patter that would be experienced as soothing. There might be the sound of animals, nocturnal creatures moving in the darkness outside. But these sounds would all be muted, distant, not intrusive. The smell of the bedroom would be subtle but distinct. The smell of the stone or earth of the walls, the smell of the bedding and the wool or linen, the faint smell of the oil in the lamp, the smell of any herbs or flowers that had been placed in the room for their fragrance. All of these would combine to create a particular smell that would become familiar, that would be associated with sleep and rest and safety. And so the bedroom, when we look at it carefully, was a carefully constructed environment. It was not carefully constructed in the way that we might construct environments today, with thermostats and humidity controls and carefully chosen lighting. But it was carefully constructed nonetheless, with an understanding of what conditions promoted sleep, what helped the body and mind to rest, what created a sense of safety and enclosure. Every element of the bedroom, the temperature, the light, the sounds, the smells, the comfort of the bed, the privacy of the space, was designed, either consciously or through long cultural practice, to facilitate the transition into sleep, to create conditions under which Hypnos and Morpheus could work their gentle magic. Nocturnal visits and the boundaries of the night, but even as we have been describing the bedroom as a place of safety and enclosure, even as we have emphasized the privacy and security of the sleeping space, we must acknowledge that the night was understood as a time when the boundaries between worlds became thin, when the possibility of encounters with beings and forces that did not inhabit the daytime world became more likely. The ancient Greeks understood the night as more permeable than the day. While the day was the realm of human activity, of clear vision and clear thinking, of social life and public activity, the night was the realm of the mysterious, the unknown, the potentially dangerous. It was the realm where gods and goddesses moved more freely, where the dead sometimes appeared, where spirits and demons and beings of various kinds could more easily make contact with the living. Hekate was particularly associated with these liminal hours. She was the goddess of crossroads and boundaries, yes, but she was also the goddess of magic and of the hidden knowledge that existed beyond the boundaries of ordinary understanding. She was invoked for protection, but she was also the one who could reveal hidden things, who could help one to see past the veil that separated the visible from the invisible world. In some cases, people might perform specific rituals at night as a way of invoking Hekate or communicating with her. These rituals might involve leaving offerings at a crossroads, the place that was most sacred to Hekate at the dark of the moon when her power was said to be strongest. The offering might be food, might be herbs, might be words of prayer or invocation. But beyond these formal rituals, there was a general understanding that the night was a time of heightened spiritual activity. a time when one was more likely to encounter the divine or to be touched by forces that one could not entirely understand or control. The dreams that came during sleep, for instance, were understood as a kind of contact with the divine or with the supernatural. They were not understood as purely internal phenomena, as something that was entirely generated by the brain of the sleeper. Rather, they were understood as real encounters, as experiences that had some objective reality, even if they did not occur in the physical world as it was perceived in daylight. A young woman who dreamed of a visitor in the night might wonder upon waking whether the visitor had been purely a dream or whether someone or something had actually been present in her chamber. The boundary between these possibilities was not as clearly drawn as it might be for us today. Both explanations might be simultaneously true, or the distinction between the two might not have seemed as important as it does to us. There was a category of beings that the Greeks called the erotes, lesser deities associated with desire and love. These beings might visit women during the night, particularly young women, and might appear in dreams or in that strange space between waking and sleeping where the line between internal and external events becomes unclear. Similarly, the dead sometimes appeared in the night. A deceased family member might visit a sleeping relative, might bring a message, might demand something that was owed to them. These visits were understood as real encounters, as communication between the world of the living and the world of the dead. The night, with its thinning of the boundaries between worlds, was the primary time when such encounters took place. And then there were the demons and malevolent spirits that were understood to roam during the night. These were not the great gods or goddesses, but rather lesser beings that might cause trouble, that might bring illness or misfortune, that might steal children away or lead people astray. Against these dangers there were protections. The presence of Hestia in the home, maintained through the care of the hearth fire, provided a kind of general protection against harmful spirits. The presence of amulets, small objects that were believed to carry protective power, might be worn or kept near the bed. Words of power, invocations, prayers might be spoken before sleep or upon waking, as a way of ensuring safe passage through the night. And the presence of loved ones could be a protection as well. A child sleeping near a parent or in the same room as family members would be protected by the presence of adults, by the knowledge that if something did appear in the night, there would be someone there to respond, to protect, to ensure safety. In a household where the family slept in the same or connected chambers, which was common in poorer households where space was limited, the night would be experienced communally. If a child woke in fear, they could reach out and touch a parent. If someone had a nightmare or thought they heard something unusual, they could wake someone else, could confirm that they were safe. But even in wealthier households where bedrooms were more separate and private, there would still be the knowledge that other family members were sleeping nearby, that the home was occupied and protected by the presence of its inhabitants. And so the night, while it was understood as a time of potential danger, was not a time of isolation or complete helplessness. The night was protected, guarded, inhabited by the sleepers themselves and by the presence of the divine in the home. The sleep that took place was understood as safe sleep, as sleep that was held within protective forces, as rest that could be trusted. As we move with you deeper into your own night, as your own sleep grows closer and more inevitable, you too are protected by forces that are in some sense the same as those that protected the ancient Greeks. The darkness around you, while it might seem to harbor unknown dangers, is also a container, a boundary that separates you from the chaos of the outside world. Your own home, your own sleeping space, is a sanctuary, a place of safety, a realm where your rest is honored and protected. The practices of women across classes let us now turn our attention to the ways that the evening preparations and bedtime rituals varied depending on a woman's social class and circumstances. For in ancient Greece, as in all times and places, wealth and status created significant differences in how one lived, in what one had access to, in how much time and attention could be devoted to the practices of daily life. We begin with the wealthiest women, the wives and daughters of the most prominent families in the great cities of ancient Greece. These women lived in houses that were spacious, that had multiple rooms dedicated to different purposes. They had servants to attend to their needs, to prepare their food, to maintain their homes, to help with bathing and dressing and all of the practices of daily life. A wealthy woman in the evening would retire to a comfortable chamber. The room would have good furniture, would be well furnished with the comforts that money could buy. The bed would be substantial and comfortable. There would be space for servants or attendants to move about to help her prepare for rest. As evening came, a servant would begin to prepare the bathing water. This was not a quick process. The servant would draw water from a well or cistern, would heat it slowly and carefully. While the water was heating, the wealthy woman might sit in another room, might be attended to by servants who would be removing her outer garments, who would be brushing her hair, who would be helping her to gradually transition from the activities of the day into a more restful state. The bathing itself would take place in a dedicated bathing chamber or in a large basin in the woman's own chamber. The water would be heated to a temperature that was comfortable, not too hot and not too cool. The woman would enter the water and would recline in it, allowing her body to relax completely in the warm embrace. A servant would be present to pour water over the woman's shoulders and arms to help her wash her hair, to ensure that she was comfortable and that nothing she needed was unavailable. In some wealthy households, there might be multiple servants assigned to this task, so that the woman was attended by several people, each focused on different aspects of her care. Once the woman had bathed, she would be dried thoroughly with soft linens that had been warmed near a fire. She would be anointed with oils, precious oils that had been brought from far away, oils that had been infused with flower scents, oils that had been chosen specifically for their properties of relaxation and comfort. The massage that would follow the anointing would be thorough and careful. The servant would work on the woman's arms and shoulders, her back, her legs, her feet. The woman might lie on a couch while this happened, might allow herself to be completely passive, completely attended to by another person. While this was happening, servants might be other tasks, preparing the woman's sleeping garments, warming the bed, preparing hot water for the woman to rinse her feet if she desired, preparing any beverage she might want to drink before sleep. The evening meal for a wealthy woman might be more substantial than the simple meal eaten in a poor household. She might have bread, cheese, fruits, perhaps a small portion of fish or meat, wine heavily diluted with water. The meal would be served to her, might be served while she was reclining on a couch, attended by servants who ensured that everything she needed was at hand. And after the meal, she would retire to her sleeping chamber, would slip into her prepared bedding, would have the comfort of knowing that if she wanted anything during the night, water, an additional blanket, the presence of someone to talk to, she had only to call and it would be provided. A woman of the merchant class, the middle class of ancient Greece, would have some of these comforts but not all of them. She might have a servant or two but not a household full of servants. She might have a comfortable bed, but it would perhaps not be as luxurious as that of the wealthiest women. She might bathe regularly, but the process of heating water and preparing the bath would require more of her own physical effort or the effort of her family members. The merchant woman might spend part of her evening actively engaged in work, spinning wool, weaving cloth, preparing food for the next day. As evening deepened, she would gradually transition from active work to rest. She might bathe, but the bath would be simpler and quicker than that of a wealthier woman. She would likely dress in simple sleeping garments. She would recline on her bed, a good bed but perhaps simpler than that of a wealthy woman, and would fall asleep more quickly, having spent the day in active labor. A poor woman, a woman who lived in a modest home, who had no servants, who did much of the physical labor of maintaining her household herself, would have the simplest evening preparations. She might wash her face and hands and feet in water drawn from a well or stream. She might change into simpler sleeping garments. She might lie down on a pallet that served as her bed, might cover herself with whatever cloth was available. And yet even the poor woman's evening would include the important elements of transition, of marking the passage from day into night. Even if she had no servants, even if she had few comforts, she would still take the time to wash, to change into sleeping clothes, to mark in some way the shift from the active hours of the day into the vulnerable hours of sleep. But there is something important to notice here. Something that it is easy to miss if we focus too much on the differences in material comforts. Regardless of class, regardless of wealth, the essential elements of the evening preparation remained the same. Bathing, changing of clothes, a light meal, a transition from active work to rest, a deliberate approach to sleep. These practices were engaged in by women across all classes. The wealthy woman's elaborate bathing ritual and the poor woman's quick wash at the well were both ways of marking the transition, of preparing the body and mind for sleep. The wealthy woman's luxurious oils and the poor woman's simple use of water were both acts of care for the body. The wealthy woman's quiet retirement to a spacious chamber and the poor woman's lying down on her pallet were both transitions into the private realm of sleep. In this sense, we see something universal about the human need for rest, about the human recognition that sleep needs to be prepared for, about the human desire to mark the boundary between day and night. These rituals crossed class boundaries. They were practiced by women of all stations of life. They were also class-specific practices, of course. A poor woman might not be able to afford to leave a lamp burning through the night, might sleep in complete darkness. A wealthy woman would have a lamp burning to provide light and comfort. A poor woman might share a sleeping space with her whole family, with multiple people sleeping in the same room or even on the same mat. A wealthy woman might have privacy in her sleeping chamber. And yet, within each class, within each situation, the woman would work with what she had to create the best conditions for rest that she could. She would do what she could to ensure that her sleep was comfortable, that her body was cared for, that the transition into sleep was as smooth and peaceful as possible. This is something remarkable about human culture and human nature. We are capable of creating comfort and meaning within whatever circumstances we find ourselves in. Whether a woman had servants or had no servants, whether her bed was elaborate or simple, she would bring care and intention to her sleep preparations. She would find ways to honor the transition into night, to care for her own body, to prepare herself for rest. And in this, the women of ancient Greece were not so different from us. Regardless of our circumstances, we too seek comfort before sleep. We too have practices that mark the transition from day to night. We too understand that sleep is important, that preparation matters, that there is something valuable in taking time to care for oneself before rest. Rituals of goddesses and the seasons. Now let us consider how the evening preparations and bedtime rituals changed according to the seasons, and how different goddesses were honored at different times of the year, with their influence being particularly felt during the evening hours. In the spring, when the world was coming back to life after winter, when new growth was emerging and the days were becoming longer, the evening preparations would reflect this shift. The bathing water might be infused with flowers that had just begun to bloom, early spring flowers, delicate and fragrant. The oils used for anointing might be slightly lighter, reflecting the warming weather. In spring, the goddess most honored in the evening would be Persephone, who had just returned from the underworld and was rejoining her mother Demeter in the upper world. Persephone was associated with the renewal of life, with the return of the light, with the cycles of the earth and the sky. In the evening, a woman might think of Persephone as she prepared for sleep, might reflect on the cycles of rest and activity that paralleled the cycles of the seasons. As spring turned to summer, the season of light and warmth and intense activity, the evening preparations would shift again. The days were longer and there would be more daylight remaining even as evening approached. The bathing water might be cooler in the warmest months as the warmth of the day was still strong. The oils might be lighter still, and in the hottest months a woman might sleep wearing less, might prefer minimal bedding to the heavier blankets of winter. In the height of summer, Artemis would be particularly honored. Artemis was the goddess of the wild places, the huntress, the one who moved through the landscape in the cool hours of late evening and night. Young women in particular might feel a special affinity with Artemis during the summer months, might think of her as they prepared for sleep, might imagine themselves as moving through the landscape with her during the nights of sleep, journeying in dreams through wild and beautiful places. As summer turned to autumn, as the days began to shorten and the air grew cooler, there would be a shift in the evening preparations once again. The flowers available for bathing water would change, fewer delicate blooms and more of the heavier, richer scented flowers of late summer and early autumn. The oils would become slightly richer, slightly heavier, reflecting the body's need for more nourishment as the season changed. In autumn, as the harvest took place and as the stores of food were being gathered in and preserved for the winter, Demeter would be particularly honored. The evening meal would become slightly more substantial, as the demands of harvest work required more nourishment. The gratitude for the food that had been grown would be more explicitly present in the consciousness of the people. And as autumn turned to winter, as the days grew shorter and colder, as darkness came earlier and lasted longer, the evening preparations would again shift. The bathing water would be warmer, would perhaps be heated from a larger fire, as keeping warm became a more pressing concern. The oils would be richer and heavier to provide more nourishment to the skin as the air grew drier and colder. The bedding would grow thicker. More blankets would be layered on the bed. Hot stones wrapped in cloth would be placed in the bed to warm it before sleeping. The bedroom would feel more like a refuge, more like a shelter against the cold outside. In winter, the evening world would be particularly dark and mysterious. It would not grow dark in the evening as it did in other seasons, but rather the darkness would come earlier and would last longer. The contrast between the warmth of the home and the coldness outside would be more dramatic. In winter, Hestia would be particularly honored and invoked. The hearth fire would be more important than ever, as it would be the primary source of warmth in the home. Spending time near the hearth in the evening would be more appealing, as the cold outside would make the warmth more precious and more welcome. And Hecate's presence would seem more real, more palpable, as the darkness of night was most complete in winter. The boundary between the world of the living and other realms would seem especially thin in winter, especially in the hours of deep darkness before the dawn. There were also specific religious festivals and ritual occasions that would affect the evening preparations and bedtime practices. During festivals dedicated to particular goddesses, the evening rituals might be more elaborate, might include specific offerings or invocations, might be designed particularly to honor the goddess who was being celebrated. The festival of Andisteria, for instance, was a festival primarily in honor of Dionysus, god of wine and altered states, but it also involved the dead and the spirits who walked during certain nights of the festival. During this festival, the evening preparations might include specific protections, specific invocations, a more conscious awareness of the thinning of the boundary between the living and the dead. The festival of the Smophoria, celebrated by women, honored Demeter and involved the participation of women in rituals that were secret, that were not to be shared with men. During this festival, the evening might be particularly focused on honoring Demeter, on recognizing the place of women as the continuers of life through their ability to bear children, on the connection between the fertility of the earth and the fertility of women's bodies. And there were smaller household-based celebrations that would occur regularly. Each month had rituals dedicated to the goddess of the moon, with special attention paid to the nights of the new moon and the full moon. On the night of a full moon, the bedroom might be flooded with moonlight, and sleep would be different, would be illuminated by the silver light of the moon rather than by the artificial light of an oil lamp. On the night of the new moon, darkness would be complete, and special invocations might be made to Hekate, who was particularly honored at the time of the new moon. The evening might feel different, might feel heavier with the presence of mystery and the unknown. And so the evening preparations and bedtime rituals were not static practices that remained the same throughout the year. Rather, they were fluid, responsive to the changing seasons, to the festivals being celebrated, to the particular goddesses whose presence was most strongly felt at any given time. This responsive quality meant that a woman's evening was never quite the same from night to night. There was always some variation, some adjustment to circumstances, some way in which the practices reflected the larger rhythms of nature and of the religious calendar. And in this way, the evening preparations connected the individual woman in her bedroom on her particular night to the much larger cycles of the seasons, to the festivals of the religious year, to the eternal goddesses who moved through the cycles of life and death and rebirth that governed all existence. Sleep disorders and the goddesses of healing, but we must also acknowledge that not all nights were nights of peaceful sleep. Even in ancient Greece, even with all the rituals and preparations designed to facilitate rest, some people would lie awake in their beds, unable to sleep, disturbed by anxiety or physical discomfort or the activity of the mind. Insomnia was understood as a real affliction, a real problem, something worthy of concern and of attempted remedies. And there were goddesses and gods who were invoked when sleep would not come, when the blessing of Hypnos was being withheld for reasons that could not be understood. Morpheus, as we have discussed, was the god who shaped dreams, and if sleep would not come, it was sometimes understood as Morpheus refusing to come or being prevented from coming by some other force. And this might be addressed through various means, through prayer, through offerings, through changes in the evening preparations. But there was also the possibility that the insomnia had a physical cause, that there was some imbalance in the body that was preventing sleep. And in this case, other goddesses would be invoked, particularly healing goddesses, goddesses associated with medicine and with the restoration of health. Asclepius, the god of medicine, had a whole cult dedicated to him, and people who were suffering from various illnesses or afflictions would make pilgrimages to his temples to seek healing. One of the primary methods of seeking this healing was through the practice of incubation, where a person would spend the night in the temple, would sleep in the sacred space, and would receive a healing dream or would awaken healed. But even outside of these formal pilgrimages to temples, people who were having trouble sleeping might invoke healing goddesses and gods, might make offerings, might perform rituals designed to restore balance to the body and mind. There was an understanding that sleep could be disturbed by various things, by an excess of heat in the body, by an imbalance of the humors, by anxiety or fear, by the presence of harmful spirits or malevolent forces. If the problem was believed to be one of excess heat in the body, cooling methods would be employed. The evening bath would be taken in cooler water. The sleeping chamber would be kept deliberately cool. The bedding might be lighter. Foods that were believed to have cooling properties would be eaten. If the problem was believed to be one of an imbalance of humors, a different approach would be taken. The humors blood, phlegm, black bile and yellow bile were believed to govern health and temperament. An imbalance of the humors could affect sleep. If someone had too much of a particular humor, various remedies might be attempted. Bloodletting, purging, the use of certain herbs or foods that were believed to balance the particular humor that was in excess. If the problem was believed to be psychological, if the insomnia was caused by anxiety or by painful memories or by worry about the future, then different remedies would be employed. A woman might be encouraged to speak to an older woman who could offer advice, who could help her process her anxieties. She might be given herbal remedies that were believed to calm the mind, certain types of poppy, certain herbs that had sedative properties. She might also be encouraged to engage in the evening rituals even more carefully, to give even more time and attention to the preparations for sleep. Sometimes what was needed was not a dramatic remedy, but rather a doubling down on the practices that were designed to create conditions favorable to sleep. And there was also the possibility of seeking intercession from a healing goddess. Hestia, daughter of Asclepius, was particularly associated with health and with the maintenance of good health. A woman suffering from insomnia might make an offering to Hestia, might invoke her, might ask for her help in restoring health to herself. Sometimes the problem was understood as being caused by spiritual forces, by the presence of a restless spirit or by the attention of a god or goddess who was displeased. In this case, specific rituals of appeasement or invocation might be performed. Offerings might be left at an altar. Prayers might be spoken. The help of a priestess or a person knowledgeable about spiritual matters might be sought. But sometimes, despite all efforts, despite all the rituals and remedies and invocations, a person would continue to suffer from insomnia. The night would remain sleepless. The body would remain restless. The mind would continue to churn with thoughts. In these cases, the condition itself would begin to be understood as a form of suffering, a form of punishment perhaps, or a test of character. A woman suffering from persistent insomnia might be seen as someone undergoing a trial, someone whom the gods were testing, someone who might eventually emerge from this trial with greater wisdom or spiritual development. Some philosophers and spiritual teachers advocated for the acceptance of insomnia, for the use of the wakeful hours for contemplation and spiritual practice, rather than as a source of frustration. If sleep would not come, they suggested, then these hours of wakefulness could be used for meditation, for prayer, for deep thinking about the nature of existence and one's place in the world. But not everyone could accept insomnia in this philosophical way. For most people, for most women who simply wanted to be able to sleep, to rest, to experience the blessing of Hypnos, insomnia was a distressing condition that they would do whatever they could to remedy. And so we see that even in ancient Greece, Even in a time when the evening preparations and bedtime rituals were well established and widely practiced, not everyone slept well every night. The human experience of sleep has always been complicated, has always sometimes been difficult. And the human response has always been to seek out ways to address the difficulties, to invoke the help of healing powers, to do whatever is possible to restore the blessing of restful sleep. Aphrodite in the marriage bed. Now we must turn our attention to a specific context in which the evening preparations and the bedroom itself took on particular significance. We must speak of the marriage bed, of the bedroom in the context of a married couple, of the intimate life that took place in the bedroom. The marriage bed held a special place in Greek society and in Greek imagination. It was understood as more than simply a place where two people slept. It was the place where the marriage was consummated, where children were conceived, where the intimate life of a married couple took place. When a young woman married, typically in her late teens or early 20s, the evening of the wedding would be particularly significant. After the wedding ceremony and the celebrations that followed, the bride would be brought to the bedroom that had been prepared for her and her new husband. The bedroom would have been prepared carefully. The bed would have been made up with fresh, beautiful bedding, often supplied by the bride's family. The room would have been decorated, would have been made beautiful and welcoming. Older women of the household, aunts, cousins, mothers, might gather in the bedroom before the couple joined each other, might offer advice or words of encouragement or warning to the young bride about what would occur. The young bride would have been bathed and dressed in special garments, would have been anointed with oils and perfumes. She would have been prepared not just physically but psychologically, prepared to fulfill her role as wife, as the woman who would bear children, who would maintain the household. When the groom arrived, the women would withdraw, leaving the couple alone. The door would be closed, and in the privacy of the bedroom, in the light from the oil lamp or by candlelight, the intimate life of marriage would begin. Aphrodite, the goddess of love and desire and sexuality, would be understood as present in this moment. The young bride, while she might be nervous or frightened, for often these marriages had been arranged, and a girl might not have known her husband well before marriage, would be invoking Aphrodite, or at least would have been instructed to be receptive to Aphrodite's power, to allow herself to experience desire and connection with her new husband. The mythology tells us stories of how Aphrodite could create desire, could inspire passion, could make even people who did not like each other feel drawn to one another. In the context of the marriage bed, Aphrodite was the goddess who made the marriage consummation possible, who eased the way for a young woman's transition from virgin to wife, who blessed the union with pleasure and desire. After the intimate act was completed, after the couple had consummated the marriage, the women of the household would be waiting outside the bedroom door. There would be signs that the marriage had been consummated, blood on the bedding, for instance, evidence of the bride's virginity. The night would end with celebrations and rejoicing, with the confirmation that the marriage was valid, that the bride had come to her husband as a virgin. From that night onward, the marriage bed would be the place where the couple's intimate life took place. And while much of what happened in the bedroom would be private, unseen, unknown to others, it would still be understood as important, as central to the marriage relationship, as something that was governed by Aphrodite's influence. The evening preparations in a married woman's household would take on particular significance in this context. The bathing, the anointing with oils, the careful attention to appearance and to the aromatic properties of the oils used, all of this could be understood, if a woman wished, as preparation not just for sleep, but also for the possibility of intimate relations with her husband. A married woman would continue to engage in the evening preparations, the bathing, the dressing in sleeping garments, the retirement to the bedroom, but she would be doing so in the context of her marriage, in the knowledge that her husband might join her in the bedroom, that the night might include intimate acts as well as sleep. If a husband came to his wife's bed, the evening rituals would have partially prepared her for this. She would be clean, would be perfumed with pleasant oils, would be dressed in soft garments. The conditions for intimate connection would be created by the practices that had nominally been designed for sleep and self-care. And the bedroom itself would serve multiple functions. It would be a place of sleep and rest, yes, but it would also be a place of intimacy, a place where the couple could be alone together, could create the privacy needed for their intimate life. Aphrodite would be understood as the goddess who blessed this intimate life, who made it possible, who filled it with pleasure rather than allowing it to be purely functional, purely for the purpose of producing children. In the Greek understanding, while the primary purpose of marriage was the production of legitimate children, the marriage bed was also understood as a place of pleasure, as a place where desire could be experienced and fulfilled. A woman who was considered beautiful, who took care of her appearance, who anointed herself with pleasant oils and perfumes, who used the practices of self-care that we have been describing, would be more attractive to her husband, would be more likely to experience pleasure in the intimate acts that took place in the marriage bed. And so we see that Aphrodite's domain, while it was often associated with beings outside of marriage, with courtesans and with the lovers who were not married to each other, was also very much present within the marriage bed itself. A married woman who engaged in the careful practices of body care, who maintained her beauty, who opened herself to desire and to pleasure, was honoring Aphrodite and was using Aphrodite's gifts to strengthen her marriage. The evening preparations viewed in this light were not merely about self-care or about preparing for sleep. They were also potentially about maintaining one's attractiveness to one's husband, about ensuring that the marriage bed remained a place of connection and pleasure, and not merely a place of duty. And yet it is important to note that this perspective, that beauty and pleasure were valuable in their own right, stood in tension with other values in Greek society that emphasized women's primary purpose as being to bear legitimate children, to maintain the household, to be modest and chaste and controlled. A woman who spent too much time on her appearance, who sought too much pleasure, who used Aphrodite's gifts too openly, might be criticized or condemned. A wife was expected to be faithful, was expected to give pleasure to her husband, but was also expected to be modest, to not seek pleasure for its own sake, to not behave in ways that might be seen as immodest or improper. And so a married woman had to navigate a delicate balance, to maintain her beauty and to be receptive to pleasure and desire, but to do so in a way that remained appropriate, that remained within the boundaries of propriety and decency. The evening practices of bathing and anointing, of careful attention to appearance and to the feel and smell of the body, could be understood as a way of engaging with Aphrodite's power while remaining appropriate. By engaging in these practices in the privacy of the home, by doing them primarily for the benefit of a husband and for one's own comfort, a woman could maintain her beauty and attend to her own pleasure without being seen as immodest or inappropriate. And so Aphrodite's influence in the bedroom was complex, filled with both pleasure and constraint, with both freedom and limitation. A woman in a Greek household would have understood the evening preparations as allowing her to engage with Aphrodite's power in a way that was appropriate to her status and her role, while also allowing her to experience pleasure in her own body, to care for herself, to maintain a sense of beauty and desire even within the constraints of the role she was expected to play. Children and nighttime FEARS, we must now turn our attention to a particular group of people who experienced the evening and the approach of sleep in ways that were quite different from adults. We must speak of children, of the young boys and girls who lived in Greek households, of the particular fears and needs that children had in relation to sleep and the night. A small child in an ancient Greek household would have experienced the approach of night with a mixture of anticipation and fear. The darkness outside would grow greater, the household would grow quieter, the activity of the day would wind down, and for a child this transition could be anxiety-provoking. The night represented the unknown, the realm of strange beings and dreams and potential dangers. A child would be put to bed by an older woman, a mother, a grandmother, an older sister, a servant woman. The child would be brought to the sleeping area, would be helped to remove their day clothes and put on sleeping garments. The sleeping garments for a child would typically be very simple, just a loose tunic or shift that would be comfortable for sleeping. The child's body would be washed if it was particularly dirty from the day's activity. Water would be poured over the arms and legs and face, and the child would be dried with a soft cloth. This washing would serve partly a practical purpose, but it would also serve the purpose of calming the child, of soothing them with gentle touches and cool water. In some cases, the woman putting the child to bed might massage the child's body gently, using the same kind of soothing motions that would be used on an adult. This would help the child's body relax, would help the muscles release tension, would create a sense of care and safety. The child would then be helped into bed, would be settled under blankets or cloths. The woman would sit next to the bed, might continue to touch the child gently, stroking their hair, rubbing their back in ways that were designed to soothe and calm. And then stories would begin. The woman would tell stories, sometimes stories of the gods and goddesses, sometimes stories of the family's own history, sometimes just simple stories designed to be comforting and peaceful. The voice of the older woman would be soft, would be rhythmic, would carry a kind of soothing quality that would help the child's mind to relax. The stories might involve the goddesses we have been speaking of. A child might be told a simple version of a myth, a story that emphasized the protective aspect of a goddess. A girl might be told stories of Artemis, the great protector of young women, stories that emphasized how Artemis would keep her safe. A boy might be told stories of warrior goddesses or of the gods who watched over human beings. Or the stories might simply be comforting narratives, stories in which things worked out well, in which goodness triumphed, in which the hero was protected and safe. The point was not necessarily to teach the child about the gods or about morality, but rather to occupy the child's mind with pleasant images and narratives to distract from the fear of the approaching night. As the child's breathing began to slow, as their eyes began to close, the woman would continue to speak, or might shift to humming or singing. The songs might have simple melodies and simple words, might be lullabies that had been passed down through generations of women, songs that mothers had sung to their children forever. The presence of the older woman was crucial for the child's sense of safety. A small child who was put to bed without this kind of attendance, without an older person remaining present for a time, might experience significant fear. The presence of another person, of someone who was awake and vigilant, who was protecting the child, was essential for the child to feel safe enough to fall asleep. And so the older woman would remain by the child's bed until sleep had arrived, until the child's breathing had become deep and regular, until the child's body had become completely relaxed. Only then would she quietly move away, leaving the child to sleep. But even after the woman had left, the child would know that she was nearby, would know that there was another person in the house who was awake, who was available if something went wrong, if the child woke frightened or in pain. If a child did wake in the night, frightened by a dream or by the darkness or by some sound, they would call out, and the older woman would come. She would sit by the bed, would comfort the child, would reassure them that they were safe, that there was nothing to fear, that the older woman was there and would keep them safe. If a child had a nightmare, had encountered something frightening in their dreams, the woman would help the child to process this, to understand that the nightmare was not real, that it was just a dream. She might offer explanations. The sound that had frightened the child was just wind, was just a neighbor, was nothing dangerous. The creature in the dream was just the mind playing tricks, was not real. And gradually the child would be calmed, would be reassured, would be made to feel safe again. And if the child wanted to, they might sleep in the same space as the older woman for the remainder of the night, might sleep next to their mother or a servant woman, close enough to touch, close enough to be protected. As children grew older, they would gradually move toward more independent sleep. A young girl might continue to sleep in close proximity to her mother until she married. A young boy might move to sleeping quarters with other boys or men as he grew older. But the experience of being comforted and protected before sleep would have established patterns that would remain throughout their lives. And we must acknowledge that some children in ancient Greece experienced trauma, experienced abuse, experienced violence in their homes. A child living in a household where there was violence or cruelty would not have felt safe, would not have felt protected. The evening approach of sleep would not have felt like a comfortable transition, but rather like an exposure to danger. But for children in homes where there was genuine care and protection, the evening routine and the approach of sleep would have been deeply shaped by the presence of protective older women, by the stories and songs and gentle touches that marked the transition into sleep. The goddesses themselves would have been understood as protective presences for children as well. Artemis, protector of young girls, would be invoked to keep girls safe. Hestia, with her steady presence at the hearth, would be understood as protecting the entire household, including the children. And as children grew and matured, as they gradually took on adult roles and adult understanding, they would carry with them the memory of being protected, of being cared for, of the older women who had sat beside their beds and told them stories, and made them feel safe as they made the transition into sleep night after night. DREAMS, and the divine messages of the night. Let us now turn our attention to something that occupied considerable importance in Greek consciousness. The belief that the night, through dreams, provided access to the divine, that Morpheus and the other powers of sleep could convey messages from the gods, could reveal hidden knowledge, could guide human beings toward important decisions. There was a whole practice in ancient Greece called oneiromancy, the interpretation of dreams. People who were skilled in this practice could help others to understand what their dreams meant, could extract the messages that the gods were trying to convey through the medium of sleep and dreams. There were also texts, dream interpretation manuals, that had been written by people claiming expertise in understanding dreams. These texts would list various types of dreams and their meanings. A dream of flying might mean one thing, a dream of water might mean another. A dream involving a deity might be understood as a direct communication from that deity. But beyond the general practice of dream interpretation, there was something called the Oracle of Dreams, most famously at the temple of Asclepius at Epidaurus. People who were suffering from illnesses or who needed guidance would come to the temple, would perform rituals of purification, would then sleep in a special chamber in the temple. During the night, while they slept in this sacred space, they would receive a dream. This dream might directly show them how to be healed, might show them what remedy to use. Or the dream might be more symbolic, more difficult to interpret, in which case the priests of the temple would help them to understand the meaning. The belief was that the god Asclepius himself, or his healing power, would be present in the dream, would work through the dream to bring healing or guidance. This was understood not as a magical or supernatural occurrence, but rather as a direct communication from the divine, a conversation between the human being and the god that took place in the realm of dreams and sleep. Women who were having difficulty conceiving would sometimes perform these incubation rituals, sleeping in a temple dedicated to a fertility goddess, hoping to receive a dream that would provide guidance or that would restore their fertility. Men who were facing important decisions, about business, about political matters, about personal relationships, might travel to an oracle, might seek guidance through dreams. The night in these cases was not merely a time for rest, but a time for sacred communication, a time when the boundary between the human and the divine became thin enough to allow messages to pass through. Even outside of the formal context of temple incubation, people would pay attention to their dreams, would try to understand them, would look for messages from the divine. A woman might have a dream and would then consult with an older woman or with someone knowledgeable about dream interpretation to understand what the dream meant. A woman might dream of her deceased mother, and this would be understood as an actual communication with the dead mother, as the mother continuing to care for her to offer guidance from beyond death. The dream would be remembered, might be discussed with family members, might be thought about and analyzed for hidden meanings. A woman might dream of a god or goddess, and this would be understood as the god or goddess trying to communicate something important. The dream might be a warning, might be guidance, might be a blessing or a curse. And in the context of the marriage bed, there was a particular type of dream that was significant, the dream of a supernatural lover. Young women, particularly after marriage, might dream of being visited by a god or a semi-divine being, might experience in dreams what felt like a supernatural encounter. These dreams were taken seriously, were discussed with trusted older women, might be understood as an interaction with a god, as the god showing interest in the young woman as some kind of divine blessing or attention. All of this meant that sleep was not understood as a simple absence of consciousness, not understood as a blank space between one day and the next. Rather, sleep was understood as an active state, a state in which important work was done, in which communication with the divine took place, in which knowledge could be gained, in which healing could occur. And so the evening preparations were not just about creating physical comfort. They were also about preparing oneself to receive the messages that would come in dreams, about making oneself receptive to the divine communication that might occur during the night. A person who had properly prepared themselves for sleep, who had bathed, who had eaten lightly, who had removed themselves from the stress and activity of the day, would be in a better state to receive dreams, to remember them, to understand them. A person who was agitated, who was overfull from eating, who was disturbed by anxiety or stress, might sleep but would not receive clear dreams, would not be able to remember or understand the messages that were being offered. And so the evening rituals were partly about sleep hygiene, about creating the best physical conditions for rest. But they were also about spiritual preparation, about opening oneself to the messages of the night, about creating a receptive state for the divine communication that happened in dreams. The moment before sleep, the threshold, we now arrive at perhaps the most crucial moment of all the evening journey. The moment just before sleep, the moment when consciousness is beginning to release its hold, when the body is completely relaxed, when the boundary between waking and sleeping is becoming thin and permeable. This moment was understood by the Greeks as a kind of threshold, a boundary between two worlds. On one side was the world of waking consciousness, of clear thought, of social identity and daily roles. On the other side was the world of sleep, of dreams, of the realm of Hypnos and Morpheus, a realm where different rules applied, where the ordinary laws of physics and logic did not hold sway. In this moment, the body would have already been through all the preparations. It would be clean, would be anointed with oils, would be dressed in soft, comfortable garments. It would be lying in a comfortable bed, would be warm or cool as appropriate to the season. The mind would have been gradually quieted through the preceding hours, would be moving away from the concerns of the day toward a more inward focus. The breathing would have slowed, the heartbeat would have slowed, the individual muscles and muscles groups would have released their tension. The body would have become heavier, would seem to be sinking down into the bed. There might be a slight tingling sensation, a slight sense of the body becoming less solid, less defined, and the mind, moving in parallel with the body, would have begun to dream even before sleep arrived fully. Thoughts would have become more fluid, more strange, less connected to waking logic. Images might appear in consciousness, seeming to come from nowhere. The sense of self would have begun to loosen, to become less defined. In this moment, a person might have a sense of standing at a threshold, of being about to step from one realm into another. There might be a sense of choice, of actively choosing to let go, to surrender to sleep, to release the hold that consciousness had on the body and mind. For some people, this moment was accompanied by a sense of peace, of relief, of gratitude for the coming sleep. For others, there might be a moment of fear, a moment when the dissolution of consciousness and the loosening of the boundaries between self and other might feel threatening rather than comforting. But in the preparations that had been made throughout the evening, in the bathing and anointing and the careful creation of a comfortable environment, there would have been a kind of reassurance offered. The message implicit in all of these preparations was, it is safe to let go, it is safe to sleep, you will be safe in sleep. The protection that has been created by Hestia at the hearth, by Hekate at the boundaries, by all the goddesses who watch over sleep and night will continue through the night. You do not need to remain vigilant. You can trust that you will be cared for. And in the moment of the threshold, in the moment before true sleep arrived, a person might whisper a prayer, might make an offering, might invoke the protection of a particular goddess. They might ask for peaceful sleep, for freedom from nightmares, for healing dreams that would provide guidance or comfort. They might think of a loved one, might send a kind of mental greeting to someone they cared about, might use this liminal moment to make a connection across distance. In some traditions, it was believed that the liminal moments, the moment before sleep, the moment upon waking, the moments of dawn and dusk, were times when communication across distances was particularly easy, when thoughts could reach across space and time in ways that were not possible during ordinary waking consciousness. And then as the moment stretched out, as the threshold was approached more and more closely, consciousness would begin to truly dissolve. The world of waking would become more and more distant. The world of sleep, the realm of dreams, would become more and more real. And finally, imperceptibly, the crossing would be complete. Sleep would have arrived. The person would be in Hypnos' realm. In the moments of sleep, the body would continue in its subtle movements, in its rhythms of breath and heartbeat and the small shifts of position that kept the body comfortable. But the conscious mind would have released its hold, would have departed into the realm of dreams and sleep, where different rules applied. And in the home, the hearth fire would continue to burn. The household would be still and quiet. The night would continue its ancient work, the work of Nyx and Hekate and all the goddesses and gods of darkness. and the sleeper would rest, held within the protection of the home and the protection of the divine powers that watched over sleep. The goddesses through the night, as the night deepened, as the hours of darkness continued, different goddesses would be understood as having particular dominion over different times and different aspects of the night. And so we must trace in our imagination the progression of the night as it was understood in ancient Greece, as the presence and power of different divine beings would wax and wane through the hours of darkness. In the early hours of night, just after the sun had set, as darkness was beginning but had not yet become complete, the presence of Hesperus, the evening star, would still be felt. This was a time of transition still, a time that was not fully night but was moving toward it. The sleep that began in these hours would be shallow still, might be mixed with some remaining awareness of the waking world. As the night deepened, as Hesperus faded and true night arrived, Hypnos would have taken full possession of the realm. The power of Hypnos would be strongest at this time, holding the sleeper firmly in the embrace of sleep, preventing the waking mind from intruding on the domain of rest. And alongside Hypnos, Morpheus would be at work, shaping the dreams that would come, creating the narratives and images that would unfold in the mind of the sleeper. The dreams in the early hours of night might be relatively simple, might be relatively close to the concerns and images of waking life, might involve people and places that the sleeper knew. But as the night continued, as sleep became deeper, the dreams would become more strange, more symbolically rich, more clearly the work of Morpheus creating in his own symbolic language. The dreams would become more vivid, more real in some ways than waking reality, more emotionally intense, more complex in their meanings and their messages. Nyx, the primordial goddess of night itself, would be present throughout the night, not as an active intervention but as a kind of background presence, the fundamental power that made night possible, that created the darkness and the mystery that made all the other aspects of night possible. And then as the night continued, as the hours of deepest darkness approached, the presence of Hekate would become more palpable. This was Hekate's hour, the hour when her power was strongest, when the boundaries between the worlds were thinnest, when magic and hidden knowledge and encounters with beings from other realms were most likely. In some traditions, it was believed that Hekate moved through the night in a procession, that the sounds of the night, the wind, the crying of animals, the unexplained noises that came from darkness, were the sounds of Hecate's procession. People who were awake at these hours, who were alert, might try to sense her presence, might make offerings to her, might seek her protection or her guidance. But for most people, for most sleepers, these hours of deepest night would be hours of complete sleep, of dreams, of the absence of waking consciousness. The sleeper would be held deep in the realm of sleep, would have no awareness of what was happening in the waking world or in the spirit realm. And as the night continued to advance, as the hours moved toward the point where the night would begin to yield to the approaching dawn, there would be a subtle shift. The darkness that had been complete would begin, almost imperceptibly, to lighten. The air would begin to change. The temperature would begin very slightly to shift as the heat of the coming day began to make itself felt. This was the hour that the Romans would call matutinum, the early morning hours before dawn, the hours when the sun was preparing to rise but had not yet appeared. This was the hour when the night would be at its deepest, when sleep would be most profound, but when there would also be a kind of stirring in the natural world, a subtle preparing for the coming of light. At this time, some of the more vivid and more memorable dreams would come. This was the hour when Morpheus's work would be most intense, most visible, most able to produce dreams that would be remembered vividly upon waking. This was the hour of prophetic dreams, of healing dreams, of dreams that would carry messages from the gods. And then imperceptibly at first, the night would begin to yield. The darkness would begin to lighten, though it would still be dark, though true dawn had not yet come. The birds might begin to stir, might begin their morning songs. The air would shift. The temperature would continue to rise gradually. And as this happened, Hypnos's hold on the sleeper would begin very gradually to loosen. The sleeper would begin to come toward consciousness, though they would not yet be fully awake. They would move into lighter stages of sleep, the stages where dreaming was more active, where the mind was more close to waking consciousness. The images and narratives of these lighter dreams would be more accessible to memory, would be more likely to be remembered upon waking. A person might be able to recall the dreams of the hours just before waking in more detail than they could recall the dreams of the deep night. And then, as the first light of dawn began to appear on the horizon, as the sky began to shift from the deepest black to a dark blue, as birds began more definitely to sing, as the night prepared to give way to day, Hypnos's dominion would end. The sleeper would begin to stir, would begin to move toward waking, would begin to become conscious of their surroundings, to become aware of the room and the body and the approach of the day. The transition from sleep to waking would not be instantaneous, but gradual, moving through different stages of consciousness, just as the transition into sleep had been gradual. And the arrival of morning, the moment when Hypnos released his hold and when the sleeper began to return to the world of waking consciousness, would be understood as the dominion of a new set of goddesses and gods, as the realm of the night gave way to the realm of the day, as one sacred time gave way to another. Waking and the return to the world, and now, as the night has moved through all its stages, as the deepest hours have passed, we arrive at the moment of waking, the moment when the sleeper begins to return from the realm of Hypnos and Morpheus, begins to cross back over the threshold from sleep into waking consciousness. The waking process, like the falling asleep process, was understood as a gradual transition rather than an instantaneous change. A person might awaken fully alert, but more often waking would be a process that took time, that moved through stages. A sleeper might first become aware of their body, might notice sensations in their limbs, might feel the weight of the bedding, might sense the temperature of the air and their own body's temperature. The senses might begin to return one by one to wakefulness. Hearing would return. The sleeper might begin to notice sounds in the room, sounds from outside, sounds from the household. Sight would begin to return, though at first it might be unclear, the room might seem dark or blurred. As the eyes began to focus, as the brain began to process the visual information being sent by the eyes, the room would gradually become more distinct, more real. And gradually the sense of self would return. The boundaries between self and other would become more defined. The mind would begin to engage with the business of the day, with the tasks and concerns that awaited, with the roles that the person would need to take on. The transition from sleep to waking was understood as being influenced by the goddesses and gods of the morning. Eos, the goddess of dawn, was understood as bringing the light that woke the world from sleep. She was depicted as a beautiful woman in a chariot drawn by horses, moving across the sky just before the sun itself appeared. Her job was to bring light, to announce the arrival of the sun, to mark the transition from night to day. Helios, the sun god, would follow Eos across the sky, bringing full daylight and marking the beginning of the day proper. The arrival of the sun was understood as the arrival of consciousness, as the return of human activity and social life to the world. And as a person woke, as they became more fully conscious, more fully returned to the waking world, they might engage in certain rituals or practices that marked the transition into the day. A person might lie in bed for a moment, might not immediately get up, might take time to transition. They might stretch, might move their body gradually to wake it up fully. They might take a moment to remember their dreams, to hold on to the images and narratives that they had experienced during sleep, to try to understand what messages they might have been receiving. Some people might say a prayer upon waking, might offer gratitude for safe sleep, might ask for guidance through the day. They might invoke a particular goddess or god, might ask for their help or protection as the day began. A person might lie in bed and become aware of the events and tasks that awaited them on the coming day. The mind might begin to engage with the concerns of daily life, work to be done, people to be interacted with, responsibilities to be fulfilled. And gradually the sleeper would sit up in bed, would remove the blankets, would begin to move about. If it was winter, if the room was cold, they would move quickly from the comfort of the bed to other activities. If it was summer, if the room was warm, they might move more slowly. The body would be stretched, might be moved through simple movements to help it fully awaken. Some people might perform a few stretches or exercises, might splash water on their face to help wake up fully. And then the process of dressing would begin, the process of changing from sleeping clothes to day clothes, of preparing oneself for the activities of the day ahead. A servant might bring water for washing in the morning, might help the person to prepare, might attend to their comfort. or a person might attend to their own washing and dressing if they had no servants. The morning washing would typically be simpler and quicker than the evening bathing ritual. It would serve to cleanse the body from the night, to make the person feel fresh and alert, to mark the transition into the day. Cold water might be used in warm months to help wake up the body. Warm water might be used in cold months to help warm the body after a cold night. And as all of this was happening, as the person was transitioning from sleep into waking, into the activities of the day, there would be a gradual release of the peace and the otherworldliness that had characterized the night. The concerns of the day would come back into focus. The social self, the self that moved through the world of human relationships and responsibilities, would return. And the night, with its goddesses and its mysteries and its message-bearing dreams, would gradually fade. It would become a memory, might be discussed with others. Did you sleep well? Did you dream? But would begin to lose its vividness as the day took hold, as consciousness engaged with the immediate demands of the present moment. And yet the effects of the sleep would remain. A person who had slept well would feel more alert, more capable, more emotionally regulated than they would if they had not slept. The restoration that happened during sleep would be evident in the physical and mental state of the person in the morning. And if a person had experienced vivid dreams, had received what they understood as messages or guidance from the gods, those dreams might continue to influence their thinking throughout the day. A dream might lead a person to make a particular decision, might warn them against something, might provide comfort or confidence about an upcoming event. And so the night did not simply end when the person woke. Rather, the effects of the night, the work done during sleep and dreams, would continue to ripple out into the day, would continue to influence the person's thoughts and actions and decisions. The eternal circle and your own rest. And so we come to the close of this long night, this deep journey through the evening and bedtime practices of ancient Greece, through the realm of the goddesses who governed sleep and night and the protection of the home. We have traveled together through bathing chambers and dining rooms, through peaceful bedrooms lit by the soft glow of oil lamps. We have followed the women of ancient Greece through their evening preparations, have felt with them the gradual transition from the activity of the day into the peace and vulnerability of sleep. We have stood by their hearth fires, have listened to their stories, have been present as they invoked the protection of the goddesses who watched over darkness and sleep. And in doing so, we have come to understand that the routines and rituals we have described are not merely ancient curiosities, not merely historical facts divorced from our own lives. Rather, we have come to see that the human need for careful preparation before sleep, the human recognition that the night is a sacred time, the human desire to mark the boundary between day and night with intention and care, these are not specifically Greek, they are universal. You listening to this story, moving toward your own sleep, are participating in a human ritual that is thousands of years old. The desire for cleanliness before sleep, the comfort of soft bedding, the dimming of lights as darkness falls, the gradual releasing of the concerns of the day, these are not modern inventions, though their specific forms have changed through time. The goddesses we have spoken of, Hestia and Hekate, Aphrodite and Artemis, Hypnos and Morpheus and all the others, they do not exist in the way that the ancient Greeks literally believed they existed. But the forces that they represented, the aspects of human experience that they embodied, these remain real. The protection of home, the boundary between known and unknown, the care of the body, the beauty and sensuality of physical experience, the blessing of sleep, the mystery of dreams, all of these remain part of human experience. And so when you engage in your own evening preparations, when you bathe or wash, when you dress in comfortable clothes, when you dim the lights and prepare your sleeping space, you are honoring these forces, whether you think of them as goddesses or as the simple, practical wisdom that has accumulated about how to help the body and mind prepare for sleep. As you lie in your own bed now, as you feel the weight of the blankets, as you notice the softness of the pillow beneath your head, know that you are wrapped in thousands of years of human knowledge about how to rest, how to care for yourself, how to create safety for the vulnerable act of sleep. If your mind is still slightly active, if thoughts are still moving through consciousness, this is natural. The transition into sleep is gradual. There is no need to fight or struggle. Simply allow the preparations you have made, the comfort of your bed, the safety of your home and this moment to do their work. And if images begin to appear in your mind, if thoughts begin to become more fluid and strange, if the boundaries between self and other, between waking and sleeping, begin to dissolve, this too is natural, is the work of Hypnos and Morpheus, is the beginning of the journey into the realm of sleep and dreams. Allow yourself to drift. Allow the night to receive you. Trust that you are safe, that you are held, that the work you did during the day was good work, and that rest is something you deserve, something you need, something that is being offered to you now. The goddesses are watching. The hearth fire continues to burn. The boundaries of the home remain solid and secure around you, and in the morning you will wake renewed, will return to the world ready to engage with its demands, ready to face the day ahead. But for now, in this moment, that future morning is distant. What is real is the night, is the present moment, is the gradual releasing of consciousness into sleep. And so we leave you here in your bed, in your home, in the sacred darkness that is Nyx's domain and Hecate's territory, and the realm where all the goddesses of night hold sway. Thank you for this journey through the evening and bedtime rituals of ancient Greece. Thank you for allowing me to guide you through these stories, through these practices, through this slow and careful descent toward sleep. If you found peace in these stories, if you found comfort in this exploration of ancient practices that still speak to us across the centuries, please know that you are welcome to return here again. These stories are meant to be listened to repeatedly, are meant to become familiar friends in your evenings, are meant to be companions to you as you make your own transitions into sleep night after night. Sleep well, rest deeply. And may the blessings of the night goddesses who have watched over sleep for thousands of years watch over you as well.